So, let's round off my Guilty Pleasures Doctor Who marathon with The Day of the Doctor. Well, it's a little too early in the year to be doing Christmas special personal favourites. The Day of the Doctor is a good fit. Now, this episode, feature length episode, was first broadcast on the 23rd of November 2013. And at the time I would have been about 17 when I first watched the episode, and I remember watching it and thinking, this is one of the greatest pieces of Doctor Who there ever was. And looking back on it, I still look fondly at it, but in the years since, I have grown up a bit, and there are one or two things. It's not quite as perfect as I first viewed it to be, although I do love this episode immensely. So, Clara Oswald, played by Jenna Coleman, is now a teacher working at Coal Hill School. When on one of her kind of weekends, when she goes off to meet with the Doctor once again, the two of them are called back to London by Kate Stewart, played once again by Gemma Redgrave. And she shows them a problem that they're having at the National Gallery, in that several paintings appear to have been broken out of, with kind of figures shown in the paintings seemingly now missing. However, while they're doing so, suddenly kind of time fissures start appearing, and the Doctor ends up crossing back on previous events in his life, one leading him to run back into previous versions of himself, played by David Tennant as the 10th Doctor, and the late John Hurt as the War Doctor, the version of the Doctor that fought in the Time War. Now, once again, this episode, or special episode, it has a lot to love about it. I mean, Matt Smith is brilliant as ever. It's great to see David Tennant again. John Hurt as the War Doctor, I freaking love him. I mean, it was apparently a case of, while Paul McGann did come back to film his regeneration scene with The Night of the Doctor, neither he nor Christopher Eccleston wanted to be the Doctor who took place during the Time War, so they created a new character and offered it to John Hurt, and he said, oh yeah, I've got to have a go at that. Once again, Jenna Coleman is great as Clara Oswald. They brought back Billie Piper, only this time she's not entirely playing Rose Tyler, more playing a version of a machine called The Moment, which speaks to John Hurt's Doctor. But it's brilliant to see her back again, even if she doesn't end up interacting with David Tennant. It's just a joy to see her on screen. And it also introduces us for the first time to the character of Petronelle Osgood, who would become a fan favourite, played by Ingrid Oliver, and also gives us a little bit more kind of fit of the 10th Doctor's puzzle, with this kind of special evidently taking place somewhere in between this timeline of the Waters of Mars and the End of Time, with him seemingly hooking up with Elizabeth I, played here by Joanna Page. And they also have to deal with Zygons and Daleks. The Zygons, it's great to see them back in Doctor Who. Like with the Silurians, they actually had very few appearances in classic era, only actually appearing in one TV story, Terror of the Zygons, back in the 1970s. And while they have appeared in kind of books and they have been mentioned throughout the series since, this was their big return on screen, and it's just brilliant to see them back. It's nice to see their abilities, and they are a legitimate threat, especially with their whispery voice. They're like, you don't mind if I get comfortable. You don't mind if I do. That's still a pretty chilling aspect of them. But as I said, there are one or two things that, while I did love it the first time around, it does have one or two moments that don't quite add up. I mean, for example, or maybe not quite as well. For example, uh, Clara Oswald's new job. I will admit, looking back, I possibly found that a little jarring. Just that for her to go from kind of like a stand-in nanny, someone who's a family friend who's just looking after two kids, to suddenly being a school teacher in the blink of an eye, in one episode, that to me was a little disjointed. I mean, I can see why they did it. They wanted to provide a link back to Coal Hill School for the big opening, which is nice to see, but I don't know, it kind of just feels like she went from being a nanny to suddenly she's a school teacher, and we never really get to see why. I mean, that's the thing. The other thing that was pointed out to me when I rewatched the episode is that there's a moment right at the end, and I'm sure fans love it, and so did I, where kind of David Tennant and John Hurt's doctors are both left to go back to their own times, and Clara tells the doctor that an old man was looking for him. She thinks it was a curator. He sits down and is like, yeah, I could be a curator. Yeah, maybe I could retire and be the curator of this place. And then you get that famous voice of, I really think you might. And then we see an elderly version, elderly man, the curator, played by Doctor Who legend himself, Tom Baker. Now, it's nice to see him back in Doctor Who because he skipped out. He declined to return for the Five Doctors in 1983. Yeah, stating that he felt it was too soon after his departure, and so he didn't actually appear in the episode. They just used kind of stock footage of him in order to create his place in the crossover. So he didn't return, but he does return here, and fans lost their mind at this. I lost my mind at this. I freaking love this moment. But it does present one small problem, as a family member pointed out to me while I was watching. They were like, how can there be an elderly version of a past Doctor, given that surely when they regenerate, then that version of them kind of ceases to exist. That version of the Doctor can't have grown old. And looking back, I thought about him like, yeah, yeah. So while we all love that moment, you gotta admit it doesn't make an entire amount of sense. But aside from that, aside from those two small nitpicks, I'll admit, the episode is still a cracker. I mean, you got a classic monster returning with the Zygons, you got a load of your favourite characters in there, and while Peter Capaldi had been announced as the 12th Doctor, by this point, it was announced that Matt Smith would be leaving after the Christmas special that year, but we didn't think we'd actually get a chance to see Peter Capaldi until Christmas. And then you got one of my favourite scenes of the entire crossover, the entire episode, where they go to save Gallifrey. And while I admit it, well, like, it's another one that doesn't quite make sense, you gotta love the scene, as seemingly all 12 versions of the 12 versions of the Doctor come together. It's like, I didn't know when I was well off. All 12 of them. No, sir! All 13! And then you suddenly see those eyebrows. And it's another case of, like with Tom Baker, the audience just lose their minds at this point. You just see those eyebrows, you're in shock, and it's absolutely brilliant. So this was technically the first episode that Peter Capaldi appeared in as the Doctor, although we wouldn't get to see more of him until, of course, the Christmas of that year. So I will admit, this is an episode where people lost their minds, and I freaking love it, but I will admit it does have one or two problems as you look back on it. It's not crystal clear perfect, and it's debatable whether this is actually one of the greatest episodes of Doctor Who. I mean, for our fans, it's gonna be one of their personal favourites. It's one of my personal favourites, I know that. But, yeah, it does have one or two disjointed parts that, don't quite entirely cleanly fit together. But you know what? I still love it, and I urge you, if you haven't rewatched it in some time, please just take a moment to. So there we go. The final episode I was going to talk about on my Guilty Pleasure Marathon, The Day of the Doctor, and I freaking love it. Well, I might go on to do a Doctor Who best marathon at some point, i.e. the episodes I consider best, but for the time being, thanks for sticking with me through my Guilty Pleasures marathon, and you know what? Stay safe at home. Until next time, dear friends, allons-y.